Ghost of Tsushima blew players away with its incredible graphics, excellent immersion, and satisfying combat, but it has prompted many people to ask, which is better, Ghost of Tsushima or Sekiro? And even though these games are far more similar than it would initially appear, they do have drastic differences. In this video, we'll attempt to answer that question, so what do we think? Watch on to find out. First, let's take a look at why people are even comparing these two games to begin with. The most obvious answer, of course, is because they take place in Japan during a similar period of time, Ghost during the 13th century and Sekiro in the 16th century. But what's really strange about this, in my opinion, is that far less people have compared Ghost of Tsushima to Nioh, which is also set in Japan during a similar period of time and is also based on historical events. So why is that? I think a large reason people are not comparing Nioh to Ghost of Tsushima as much is because Sekiro is more of an action game than a role-playing game, and Ghost of Tsushima is likely closer to the action side of things all said and done, though I would classify it loosely as an RPG. Nioh, on the other hand, is easily identified as an action RPG, not only because of the sheer amount of customization it has, but also the various builds and playstyles that are available. Additionally, there are more parallels between Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro in terms of the narrative, where you see rather isolated parts of Japan, Tsushima and Ashina, being invaded by exterior forces, whereas in Nioh you're just witnessing civil war throughout the entirety of Japan. But the similarities don't end there. Ghost of Tsushima is set in one contiguous world that is completely connected, and while this isn't entirely true with Sekiro, it's true more than it isn't. Nioh, on the other hand, is not, and each mission is loaded into and has its own map, providing a different overall feeling. All these things together make the comparison to Sekiro much more natural than comparing it to Nioh, and this is before taking into account that you play as a fixed protagonist in Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro, something that has been changed with Nioh 2 with its introduction to character creation. Probably the largest difference between Ghost and Sekiro outside of gameplay is the sense of immersion. Ghost of Tsushima really makes the player feel like they are in a living, breathing version of Japan that existed nearly 800 years ago, while Sekiro does not. That's not to say that Sekiro doesn't immerse you into the game world, because it does, but From Software chose a fictional setting, Ashina, for their game. This allowed them a ton of creative freedom which led to some of the most amazing boss fights in the history of gaming, but what they lost was the opportunity to showcase the day-to-day life of ancient Japan. In Sekiro, you very much get the feeling that everything was placed there for you specifically to interact with, and is tailor-made with you in mind. In Ghost of Tsushima, it feels more like you've been dropped into a world that will go on existing with or without you. For instance, you'll often come upon peasants being attacked that will be killed if you don't intervene. Or sometimes you'll find Mongols being attacked by the local wildlife, which all happens whether or not you are present or off fighting in a distant area of the island. It's the difference between putting a house into a game and a home. One is just a building, and the other belongs to someone and is used by them as well. One thing that really excites me about Elden Ring is that it will be on a much larger scale than any previous game ever attempted by From Software, and we know that there will be mounted combat and you will travel by horse. This gives them the opportunity to add that sort of immersion to the Souls-like genre that may take it to even greater heights. What if you could slaughter a whole village and change the world state of the game? It could be a very compelling combination. The combat of Ghost of Tsushima was outstanding eventually, and was indeed one of the most pleasant surprises about the game for me. Not only was it much improved over games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which plays in a similar manner, but it has a certain style that excites you in many more ways than you'd care to admit. However, much of its flashy nature relies on groups of enemies to create cinematic fight scenes that play out much like a movie. One-on-one scenarios are much less involved and in most cases uninteresting, unless you're dueling. But this is exactly where Sekiro excels, and even though fighting tons of enemies like a parry god is fucking amazing, defeating Ishin's Sword Saint without being hit once is on a whole other level. It isn't difficult to compare the two games straight up because Ghost rarely attempts to make the game challenging even on the hardest of difficulties. It uses multiple enemies to make the game more difficult, and leans on this instead of combat mechanics nearly the whole game, except duels. While on the other hand, Sekiro is balanced around every fight being a one-on-one, particularly boss fights, and by doing so relies almost entirely on the mechanics of the player and boss for challenge. It's a simple question of, can you beat this guy with the tools at hand? Yes or no. If the game world of Sekiro being tailor-made instead of organic is a negative when compared to Ghost of Tsushima, then the combat being tailor-made is a positive. You want every house you walk into to feel alive and as if it's important, just like you want every fight in the game to mean something. Sekiro excels at this, and many players have died repeatedly before even reaching the first true boss of the game, myself included, because of that. Final thoughts. So where does that then leave us? Which is the better of the two games, and if you could purchase just one, which would it be? I think that really depends on what you find more compelling in gaming. If you're a fan of story, immersion, and the journey, then Ghost of Tsushima is definitely the game for you. On the other hand, if you prioritize gameplay and tightness of mechanics, particularly in combat, then Sekiro is an easy choice. But what if you like both of these things equally? What then do you do? I think Ghost of Tsushima has a slight edge here because it does a better job than Sekiro in many of the areas outside of gameplay and combat. The music is mind-blowingly good, the story is good, it has a longer journey with more gameplay hours in it than Sekiro, resulting in better value for your gaming dollar. That is not to say that everyone will like Ghost of Tsushima more, because they won't. But if you're just talking about pound for pound, how much they match up in each category, I think Ghost of Tsushima wins in more categories than it loses. It's just up to you to decide which categories are most important to you. Regardless of which you love more, I'd absolutely love to see a bit more Ghost of Tsushima in my Sekiro and a bit more Sekiro in my Ghost of Tsushima in future titles. Hopefully, Elden Ring will give us something to this effect, because frankly, it would likely be my all-time favorite game if it did. Here's hoping we hear something soon.